Hello everyone, this is week 6's weekly video, so listen to the video and then get started on week 6. We're halfway through the class. It's definitely started to look a little bit like summer outside last week. Of course, this morning as I was walking outside, it's cool and nice, so I'm going to try to get this done and then get some work outside done. I hope you all had a good weekend and spent time with your dads. I know my kids came over. It was great to have a little family time. So let's review some items. Last week, it looks like the quizzes were a little bit tougher for some of you. It looks like the average was about a little under an 8, which is down from what you normally do. But I really liked you had some good posts on RTI. I know I have a few more left, but I wanted to go ahead and get this video up and going, and then I'll get to the rest of the discussion boards or your answers to your questions later on this afternoon. So I want to go ahead and go over some of the RTI items that I've seen through the years. And I know I'm going to read a little bit from a script and then I'll do some comments, but I want to make sure that I hit everything I was talking about, that I was thinking about earlier. Sometimes students get the feeling that it's going to be easier with RTI than what the typical special education process was. But I want to kind of give you an idea of what it will look like, whether you're the regular education teacher or special education teacher. This is what it would typically look like. Basically, it's the data. There's a lot more data involved. I know as you're reading through it, it looks really good, and I think it is good. I don't want you to get the idea that I'm against RTI. I just want to make sure that you get the idea of what RTI would look like if you were the teacher. This is where I hear grumblings when I was the coordinator about getting data. I always heard grumblings from the special education teacher about data. Whenever they said a student met their goal, I said, okay, I want to see the data. Because if parents ask you, if you're the special education teacher, how you know that their student met their goal, you need to be able to tell the parent and show the parent how you came up with that idea. So you'll be asked to keep data. If you bring a student up for this, you'll have to keep data many times for 6 weeks, and then you'll go to a team meeting on students that are in need. That'll have several teachers in the room, and the group will discuss these students individually and may give you new strategies to try. Then you will use these strategies for another 4 to 6 weeks in many cases. Then you'll go back to the team with the new data. And this may happen several times before moving to Tier 2. And I know in your discussion boards, it seemed like many of you thought, oh, it's going to go right into Tier 2. Well, I wanted to kind of clear up that misconception there. Then when moving to Tier 2, the students get more attention and focus in the area of need in addition to your classes. And it may or may not be the same items that you're working on. It may be other items they're wanting to work on to get their speed up in whatever course content you're looking at. This will help him or her succeed, and see if this helps. If it does, then the student will be placed back in your classroom. If not, then the student may get more instruction in Tier 2 with possibilities of moving back to Tier 1, because I want to let you understand that they don't just stay in Tier 2. They'll do Tier 1, and then if you feel like they need assistance, they'll give them some extra support, some extra guidance, and then if it shows that they're able to get back understand it better by using those strategies, then they'll be back in your classroom and they'll be just like any other student. But if they don't do well in that Tier 2, then they'll move on to Tier 3. Tier 3 many times, as some of you said, is special education. Then when some schools will test students at this point to verify special education categories and get assistance they need. So they may still do the typical academic and cognitive testing and any other tests they need to decipher where that student may need. So yes, you do start working on strategies early, but it can take some time to get the special education student into special education. But I want to tell you, during this time, the students getting the assistance and new strategies and ideas that's going to help them. So the other idea I feel like mentioning in this is that is a whole school idea. So if you're a general education teacher at an elementary school and you bring up to this, then the strategies that they give you, you will also want to give to your special teachers, which would be PE, art, and music. And then if they go to another teacher for another class, then they will need that also. It will be all of you utilizing these strategies and ideas to help that student succeed. Whoops, I just moved my item there. Let's see here. Sorry there. Lost my spot. Sorry about that. A special education teacher coordinator will typically be in these meetings, but it's typically more the regular education people in these meetings. It's not a special education deal at this point. It's a whole school idea. And at times, when RTI was brought in earlier as I was teaching, everybody seemed to think it was a special education process. I know it's a regular education process with the end result, if they do go to Tier 3, possibly being a special education student. And this is where parents and teachers need to still understand the process. As a process coordinator, I had some instances, and I want you to listen closely here, especially if you're a general education teacher. What I would do is I would find, and gladly there was only a few of these times, where I would find out after the fact that a parent requested their son or daughter be tested for special education. Once you as a teacher hear this, you always need to contact your special education person for your building. You know, if you have a coordinator in their building, that's the person. If you have a process coordinator, whoever it may be, and if you're unsure, go to the principal and find out who it is. Because once you as a teacher hear from a parent that they are requesting special education services, we have a timeline that starts. We have 30 days at that time. As it, let's see here. I want to make sure I talk about everything. You know, as a district employee, you can do I wanted to bring up this also. As a district employee, you can bring up a referral question also, but the timeline doesn't start. You're a district employee, so you can come up to your special education person and ask questions about how you might be able to help a student, or that you think a student might be a special education student, and we could come in and do some observations just on our time to see what we think or what we see. We could give some suggestions, but that doesn't start our timeline. We have a little bit of time. So if you ever have a question on a student, always go to a special education person and ask them questions. Let them know kind of what you're seeing and what your thoughts are and why you're concerned, and they might be able to give you some ideas of how to help them and see if that helps that situation. But that 30 days doesn't do that. However, if the parent does, Desi has already stated here that we have 30 days to get a meeting together about a child who might have special education need. This is not once a special ed person gets news or once an email finally gets sent. It's once a parent tells any school teacher or counselor, and at that second our clock starts ticking. Whether it's on the first day of school or the last day of school, the school now has the responsibility to have a meeting within 30 days to discuss possible special education needs of that student. This doesn't mean testing. It means that we are going to collect data and meet to look over the data. So education of what RTI is and how it works is very important during this time of Tier 2 and Tier 3. So all of you will be affected in some way with RTI, and all of your students will be also. They'll get the benefit of you trying these other processes, these other strategies, whether it's in better instruction or you as a teacher, you and the student, along with many other ways. A last item to discuss is a feeling when I read through some of the posts that it's a special ed thing. It's a student learning thing. On this one. Another item I wanted to discuss is there were many times that I'd be walking down the hallway and the teacher comes by and says, "Oh, I just got one of your students in my classroom," and they'll mention the name and I'll go, "That name doesn't sound familiar." Just because a student has ADHD or autism or any behavior they suspect, they kind of expect me to know that student. And in some cases, yes, I did know the student. But in the cases that weren't, I want you to ponder the question, if you had an ADHD student or an autism student in your classroom, yes, that is a diagnosis from the medical field in many cases, but they were not in special education. I want you to think about these two students for a few minutes, and at the end of the video, I'll give you an answer. So let's look at this week's items. This week, you're going to be looking at one of the more difficult categories, emotional and behavior disorders, in Chapter 6. When you think about the terminology used for this category, many people get differing views of who you think these students are. You see the term emotional, and most of you will think about students with intense feelings. And then you'll see the term behavioral, which may lead you to behaviors, many times bad behaviors, which is exactly what they mean. However, in this category, your students will be the same in many ways, but also very different. I think one of the best ways to describe this category to me is with trust. These students are not quick to let outsiders, and you being the teacher, especially a first-time teacher for this student, you are the outsider, into their bubble or space. I know that we as teachers may expect students to respect us and expect them to listen to us. But many times this can get a new teacher into trouble very quickly. I'll explain more to you after you've dove into the chapter and read about Michelle Nielsen Pugmire from Farmington, Utah. But don't forget to learn about how the definition can be vague. In other words, I'm giving you some ideas about things to look at. What it is and what it is not. There's externalizing and internalizing of behaviors. There's the potential for academic achievement. How prevalent this group of students can be or should be. And many causes. There's many causes for this. There's also 5 dimensions of behavior. There's functional analysis. There's different educational approaches, school-wide behavioral support, student relationships, and educational placement options. It's a long list and category that can be very dear to your heart. You will gain these students' trust, and within it, their heart. And many of these students are students that I remember even now, because you will work with them and work with them. And the hardest part is realizing how hard they really are trying. I've had many teachers come to me and they're so frustrated and the students do it. But if you really get down deep and get to know the student, and in these students here, get to know, just like anybody else, as you all learned in the family chapter we had, get to know the environment the student is living in and what is going on, and you'll have a different perspective. Many times these students are really trying very hard to succeed. And it's sometimes hard for you to see that. And sometimes the toughest part for me is a few years after I've had the students, or even while I'm having the student, is how many students can and will be in the juvenile justice system. I know I used to have a video that I showed in class about this, but it's since been lost and I haven't been able to find it yet. But how many percentage of our students do go into the criminal justice system? And the toughest part is how hard that child tries, but yet to see them on a police report, or see them, hear that they've been arrested for whatever the case may be. So again, look through this chapter, really take it to heart, and I'll let you get through into the rest of the chapter before I give you that answer. This week you'll have the discussion board and quiz, and also continue to work on your differentiated instruction lesson plan. If you have questions on that, go back to last week's video, watch it, listen to the audio tapes that I put into the DI lesson folder, and look at that. And if you still have questions, email me quickly so I can get you on track. This week's discussion board, you will have to go back multiple discussion boards throughout the week. So again, you'll need to have your initial post done by Wednesday night or Thursday morning, and then post comments to your peers between Thursday afternoon and Sunday night. For your initial post, you're going to select one of the student examples below and post your first hypothesis about the function of the behavior. Base your theory on the 4 general categories of function described in the FBA article. Remember that a behavior may have more than one function working at a time. You may also want to point out factors in the environment that triggered or reinforced the target behaviors. These students are examples of typical students that you would see in your classroom that have emotional or behavior disorders. You can read the rest in the discussion board area. It's a pretty long list. So I would look at it this afternoon after you get done doing some preliminary items to see what's involved, so you have it, and then get a schedule done for this week to get it posted by Wednesday night or Thursday morning at the latest. Once you're finished with your discussion board, then go on to the quiz and take it, and then you're ready to go back to looking at your differentiated instruction lesson plan. So good luck with this week. I do want to talk about a tech item. Last week, I think I talked about Pinterest. This week we're going to talk about Evernote and OneNote. Both of these have been around a while, but you may not have used them to their fullest. You can use them to bookmark and save just about anything you find, whether it be website, whether it be articles or videos, you name it, and you can save it in your Evernote or OneNote, depending on which one you want to use. If you haven't used them, they're easy programs that can take quite a bit of storage. You set them up as folders, just like you would on your computer or in your file cabinet. I like to think of them as a digital file cabinet. And then when you're on the internet and find something, you save it to a file or folder. And most of the websites you'll be using, whether a browser that you're using like Mozilla or Internet Explorer or Chrome, they'll have an extension that you can add that anytime you're reading an article on the website or anything you're doing, you can click this little bookmark, this little tab at the top. I have one. It looks like Evernote, looks like a little elephant on top. I have it as an extension. That's the one I'm using currently. So it makes it very easy to save, to even look at a later date, to save it in a folder for viewing later or to bring out in the class. I have a folder for each one of my classes with multiple folders inside them from ideas, anywhere from ideas to next semester or future videos to view to maybe bring into a class, or just general ideas that I think are kind of neat. I will put them in that Evernote and save it in there for me to view later. And you can be selective. You don't have to share the whole thing. You can also share it with peers. So if you want to bring it up and share it, last year some people used Evernote or OneNote for their differentiated instruction collection, which I'll go into in depth later on this week or early next week. So it's time to look at one of those two today and see what you might want to do with that. Let's see here. So whether you're in the classroom, library, or a game, if you find an article or something that you think you want to use, you can save it to Evernote or OneNote. I talked mostly about Evernote. Let me minus that. One of my emails came across the screen. I talked a little bit about Evernote. OneNote is very similar to Evernote, but OneNote is part of the Windows Microsoft Office suite. So if you have it on your computer, you already have OneNote. Let's see here. Evernote's free, and OneNote, as long as you have Windows Microsoft Office, you'll have it in there. So it's paid. Now Evernote, you can buy a free a paid option, but I have never used it with mine. The free has been fine for what I've needed. Both have apps for phones and tablets, so you can pretty much use it anywhere. I would definitely give one or both a try. I used Evernote for a while, especially in conferences where I wanted to keep some ideas there. You know, I'd have my laptop with me and I'd take some notes. I'd use it there. And then I've used Evernote. They're both pretty easy to use, so give one or both of them a try. Or if you think you've got too much on your plate right now, save it for later. Bookmark both of them and get to it later. Okay? But remember, for your differentiated instruction collection, you'll need to use either Pinterest, OneNote, or Evernote to utilize with that and share with me. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Next week, we're moving on to the second half of the semester. So yes, we're halfway through class. Look at your grade. Many of you, your grades are great. Some of you may want to get your grade up a little bit, so you have plenty of time to get that grade up. Remember though, if you are having trouble, get back with me. Email me. I'll be glad to call you and talk to you and find and listen to what you're doing and what you're having frustrations with, and I'll be glad to try to help you out and find a better way of doing that. So in any comment, I told you I'd answer your question about the student that wasn't mine. Just because a student has a diagnosis from a doctor doesn't mean they are special education. In fact, we've had many, it's kind of a pet peeve of ours in special education, we have many doctors that are in counseling, or then, oh, I'm having a brain freeze here, in counseling, or a psychologist or something like that, that will just get out a script and write down on that script that that student that they are seeing needs an IEP, and the parent then will bring it to the teacher, and the teacher then in turn would bring it to me, and then we'd have to go back and explain to the parent, you know, this is not the doctor can't prescribe an IEP. That's a process for the school to do, just like we wouldn't give a script for meds, which I know sometimes many of you might think you might want to do that. We can't. That is not our expertise. So here's what happens. It means they have a diagnosis, just like I have allergies and hearing aids, but I don't have a special education need. What the teachers aren't seeing, or what you may need to remember, is that they need to have an educational need. Some students will get C's. Just because they get a particular grade doesn't mean they need special education. The student must have that educational need to receive services from special education, not just a diagnosis. I had a student that had a diagnosis of autism. We discussed a little bit earlier. The student came to high school, and I had a teacher ask me about them. So this was when they were a freshman. And I had to tell him I hadn't heard of the student, but I did go back and look into the records to make sure that there hadn't been something that was missed, and there were no special education services, and there weren't any testing data in those documents either. We've had the student in the district since they were in kindergarten, so I knew it was not a mix-up in paperwork where maybe they transferred in and they forgot to transfer the special ed paperwork. So it wasn't until the sophomore year that the parents came in and talked about it. They had been working with the student that had autism since kindergarten, and between them and the student, they didn't think the student needed any help, needed any education assistance from special education. The student would bring homework home, just like any other parent. They would help the student with their homework, and they get it turned in, and everything was fine. Middle school got a little bit rougher, from my understanding from the parents, but after the freshman year of high school, they decided they couldn't continue to help the student. They were staying up really late with the student, and really it was actually more parents doing some of the work than the student doing some of the work at times. But the student was very bright, and that's why the parents had been able to do it. So even though the student that I'm talking about had autism, there wasn't any educational need. So just because you see in your paperwork that a student has autism, or a student has ADHD, or whatever the case may be, don't just assume. Do some digging. See if there's any special education paperwork there. You know, check with a special education teacher. That's fine to do. That's great. That's using your resources. But in this case, they hadn't. So what we did at that point is, when the parent came to me as a sophomore year for their student, they talked about it. We opened up a special education referral. We went through the timeline that we discussed earlier, and sure enough, the student did qualify. They had autism, and they had an educational need at that point, and so the student, as a sophomore, was in the first year of his IEP, and we developed an IEP in that year, and he did great. This student did not need that much help. It was a higher functioning autism, but they needed the organization. They needed some of that assistance there with pragmatics and some of that organizational need. So again, don't assume that just because a student has a diagnosis that they have an IEP. So anyway, I'm going to let this go now. This can take a little bit longer. Have a good week. Get the studying for Chapter 6. And if you have questions, let me know. Have a great week. Bye-bye.